Good evening and welcome to the Selectmen's meeting for Thursday, February 5th, 2015. The agenda tonight is approval of minutes, questions from the public regarding items not on the agenda, public hearing on the application of Asylum LLC doing business as Stoneheart Pizza Company for a change of manager, public hearing on the application of E&S Group Incorporated doing business as Hingham Liquors for a pledge of license. We have 10 warrant articles to do, and then at 8 o'clock we will do a joint session with the advisory committee and the school committee, and Dr. Gallo has already joined us. And we'll do appointments, selectmen, town administrator reports, and then we have an executive session to discuss strategy with respect to real estate negotiations. And that will be a very long, full agenda. So I'll take a motion, if everybody's read minutes, to approve minutes.
Make a motion. Make a motion to approve the minutes dated December 18, 2014 and January 22nd, 2015.
And then do you want to do the executive session ones too?
I'll make a motion that we vote one motion at a time.
One motion at a time.
Okay. Okay. So a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
I move that we approve the minutes of December 18, 2014 executive session and to release those minutes with the exception of that portion pertaining to collective bargaining.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Do we have any questions from the public? Okay. Then let's go right into the public hearing for the Asylum doing business as Stonehearth Pizza for a change of manager. And you can tell me how to really say it. Come and join and speak in. Oh, at the table? At the table. Come and join us at the table. The microphones don't exactly carry into the room.
All right. So it's Asylum LLC. My name is Melissa Fernandez. I am the general manager for Stonehearth Pizza. I've been working for the company for 10 plus years, and I've opened 6 locations with them. I am in this location in Hingham 30 to 35 hours a week. I did open the location when we had a full schedule, but we're on a seasonal schedule currently and are not open during the day, only night shifts, and then through the weekend.
And the change in manager is you are changing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be under my name. It's no longer Michael Ellenfeld. He was the general manager who left last year.
Okay. And are you TIPS trained?
I am. I do have a TIP certification here for you if you'd like me to pass that along.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
I'll open it up to Paul and Paul.
No questions.
No questions?
Okay.
I'll move that we approve the request of Asylum LLC DBA Stonehearth Pizza Company for a change of manager to Melissa Fernandez.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And good luck. All right. And now we have Hingham Liquors. Come join us, please.
I like working in a big room.
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is John Walker. I'm an attorney. My office is at 775 Pleasant Street in Weymouth. I'm here this evening on behalf of E&S Group, Hingham, doing business as Hingham Liquors. Recently, the corporation refinanced its debt with a new lender, and as a part of that refinance, there was a requirement that the company pledge all of its assets, including its liquor license, to secure the loan. That's why we're here tonight. We've presented you with the packet required by the state to get forwarded to them, the application, the supporting loan documents. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Well, for me, this is the first time I've seen one of these.
It's been a while since I've done one.
So, Betty, maybe, were you the one that handled this? Or Sharon did. Sharon, can you give us just a little bit more information on this?
I really don't. I would rather Mr. Walker talk about it since
Okay.
it's
Okay, well,
financial information.
The only way that much like say a motor vehicle that you can get a lien placed on it, is for it to actually be approved by the state. In the case of a motor vehicle, it's on your certificate of title for the vehicle. In the case of a liquor license, it's on the approval by the ABCC. So it's kind of a similar process, I guess. And like I said, I've only done maybe 5 in the last 10 years, so it's not something that you see a heck of a lot of anymore.
And does this put the town at risk for the liquor license? Or?
No, it does not. It
No.
merely gives the lender the ability to step in the place of the owner of the business to sell it in the event that they were ever required to take over the business, which, based on what I've seen of this loan and this particular company, I don't think that would ever happen.
Oh my gosh, they're long-standing here in Hingham.
And any
Okay.
change that would happen in the future would still need to be approved by this board. So
Correct.
if the bank did decide to step into the current owner's shoes and take it over, for whatever reason, they would have to come and ask for a petition to change to them, and then they would have to ask if they sold it to somebody else for another position change. So you do not lose, you retain those rights.
Paul? Paul?
Nope.
Paul?
I make a motion that we approve the request of E&S Group, Inc., DBA Hingham Linkers for a pledge of license to Weymouth Bank.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. We'll now work through the warrant articles. Betty or Ted, who's going to take us through these? My favorite one is first.
I think you could take this one. I think you could take us through this one.
This one is hard fought. Every year for the advisory committee, we all used to fight over who got the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund. Betty, I'll let you do it. It's got a great history to it.
As you know, the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund is traditionally the first warrant article each year on the warrant. And this year we have 2 openings because one of the trustees has moved out of town, so there's an unexpired term that needs to be filled. And one of the other sitting trustees has indicated that he would prefer not to be renewed this time. Lou Belknap has served for a number of years. So,
Yes, he has.
You have 2 people who have volunteered to fill the positions. Pauline Monroe has volunteered to take the unexpired term that Betty Fernandez left when she moved out of town, and Laurel Cosman will do the 3-year term.
And I think these are 2 great choices. And Laurel works in elder services.
She does.
So couldn't find a better person there. Gentlemen?
I have nothing to add.
Would you like to make the motion?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I move that we recommend that Laurel
Cosman?
I think you can just recommend favorable action.
recommend favorable action on
I don't think you need to.
Article 8.
The comment and the recommended motion will come from advisory.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we go to H and I. Ted, you want to take us there? Betty, you doing this one?
I'm sure I could take you through this one.
Okay.
This is recommending the sum of $674,133.30 be transferred into the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund, and this represents the fiscal 2014 collections of the meals tax.
One interesting point is the amount we've been collecting on the meals tax is significantly higher than we thought, and nicely so. We'll take the money.
Correct. So again, all this does is put it in the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund, removes it from general fund balance, and this is part of what we've been doing for the last several years, collating that money together in one fund, the Meals Tax Stabilization.
Paul, any questions?
No.
Paul? Nope. Any further discussion? And, no?
Make a motion,
Okay.
we move favorably on Article H.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Ted, you want to do this next one?
Sure. The next one is to transfer the sum of $450,000 from the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund for the purpose of reducing the fiscal 2016 tax rate. And so essentially, this is the amount of money from the accumulation that we've occurred. Remember, we adopted the meals tax in 2011, and we've been putting this money into the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund. The tax relief program that we outlined, that the Board of Selectmen endorsed last year and we outlined, included taking that pool of money and allocating it across the first several years of the increase in debt as it relates to the as a cause of the middle school construction project. So this is taking that. It does not deal with the new money coming forward in future years.
So the new money, we just heard, was $674,000.
So remember that we made a vote last year as a town through the budget process to take $400,000 of the annual collections and use that to reduce or offset the increase in taxes that would be coming from the debt exclusion vote for the middle school. So that 400 compares to the 674. We'd be comparing 2 different years, of course, but
right.
The 674 represents our annual collections. We would think that next year would be similar or higher. Every year has increased a little bit. Some years a little bit more than the previous year. So we still have a vote to discuss in the future between now and putting this budget together as to whether or not we're going to allocate of the 16 meals tax revenue a portion of that to go into as an offset for the debt. This is dealing with the $2 million that we've accumulated over the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay. And this is a commitment we made to the taxpayers.
It was a policy statement of the board, and I think endorsed by the advisory committee and ultimately by town meeting, because it was those are the words and discussions that were made. So,
Mr. Healy?
Nothing to add.
Mr. Gannon?
Just briefly on that.
Yeah.
Hey, Ted, I know we and I talked about it, and the 674 figure in Article H, is that projected for this year?
we haven't projected revenues for 16 yet.
I meant as 15, is 674 the figure?
For 15, we already projected them when we did the budget for 15 this time last year. We said that there would be about, I think we were using 650,000, and we said we would take 400 of that and use it to offset the tax rate. There'll be a residual amount because we'll get more than the 450, and you're going to have to decide what to do with that. In the past, you've taken that and put it into the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund. 14's number is going in its entirety because there was no allocation from it because we didn't have a tax burden that we were trying to offset in 14 because we knew that the first year for the middle school debt would be 15.
And just so I'm clear, the 674 in Article H, we're transferring that from the general funds to the stabilization fund.
Correct.
And is that figure for a certain fiscal year?
That figure represents the collections from fiscal 14.
14.
Because
Okay.
again, we didn't allocate those collections anywhere. And that is part of the total that I thought is approximately 2.2 million, I believe. And, you know, we're drawing down on that pursuant to the plan that we proposed last year so that we can ameliorate the tax rate evenly. What we don't want to do is see the tax rate drop precipitously one year and then next year just come right back up because we took, you know, say 400,000 one year and 600 the next year and 300 the next year, because that bouncing of the tax rate causes a lot of other unintended consequences.
And the 450 that we're taking in Article I is coming from, if you want to call it a surplus, that's or the funds that are in the fund.
It's the
Irrespective of the 674 we just transferred.
correct. There's more than that in there.
Right.
So that one's going in and the 450 is coming out.
And then we'll revisit it again before the end of this.
Correct.
Okay?
I'll vote that we, or move that we recommend favorable action on Article I.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Another of my favorite ones.
So this article, we've adopted some additional wording in here, and you know, it doesn't show up in the comment, but we're gonna, if you go back to last year's comment, you'll see it a little bit more, and we're going to make sure that gets in there. The light plant was a little concerned that we were putting $500,000 in here. Our agreement with the light plant, and we've had this agreement now for, I think, going on 8 years. It's really stabilized that relationship, so we weren't debating it every year. And it's a function of their revenue. We receive a X percent of it, and so with a minimum of 450. I think for many years, the light plant would prefer that we just left it at 450, and if we get extra, then hey, it's a bonus. But the problem for us is that we can't disregard revenue if we know it's coming in, because we have a budget on the other side of the coin that people are looking at meeting with those revenue numbers. And so once we started hitting 500 regularly, and we've hit 500, I believe, the last 4 years in a row, it's a little hard for me to say with a straight face to any entity that is looking for why we have not enough money to meet our expenditure needs in the budget process that that's 450 when we really know it's going to be 500. So what we've done is we've put it in here with the wording so that the light plant feels comfortable that, we know it's 450, and it could be as high as 500, and we're taking the 500. If it comes in short, then that's on us, and we're going to have to, have a revenue deficit in that case.
And I think it is important in the comment.
Yes.
That they restate what was stated last year, just for clarification.
Sure. Yeah, I would recommend that we do that every year until we have a new agreement.
Yep. Paul?
Nothing.
Just quickly, Ted, the percentage every year is what?
I think,
I'm sorry.
I don't
I'm trying to remember, but I think it's 3% of net sales. But I don't have that burned into my memory, the exact
That sounds
percentage.
about right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. I'll move favorable action on Article J.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Again, this is, as most of these are, somewhat housekeeping articles. This is reauthorizing a requirement every year for us to do that, to reauthorize the Building Department revolving fund. We're allowed to collect fees for certain building permit activities. They don't go in the general fund. They stay in a special fund. They are used to pay for the cost of the inspections. We have to authorize, we have to explain what we've collected in the past, and you could see that we've collected $225,000 last year versus 160 of expenditures, and that through 6 months we've collected 130 versus 80,000 in expenditures, and we have $250,000 that we're asking for an authorization, so they can't spend any more than that. You can see last year's revenues were 225, so I think they're comfortable within that 250 limit. There's a lag here because we always collect the money up front and then we do the inspections over time.
If the fees were to be raised, would that be a way to fund another body within the building department?
Or if the fees were to be raised, it'd be a way to fund whatever you decided you wanted to fund it for. I would always caution you to try to think about necessarily raising it in one department to fund that particular department, try to fund the whole pool and then fund the department differently, because you can create some misconceptions that will raise revenue to create our own staff. What we've done, and we don't think there's any real movement here, but we looked at this revenue 2 years ago in comparison to what we were charging to all of our surrounding towns, and we're right there. We don't have any real, we're at the upper ends of what is charged within our region, so I don't think there's a lot of growth here for revenue.
Well, we're going through these very quickly.
Move favorable action on Article K.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
So Article L, your next one, is identical to the building. It's the Elder Services Revolving Fund. They run their support programs through this fund, and so they collect revenue. They collected $38,181 last year, and they expended $34,000. This is a pretty much of a wash because there are no timing differences. They collect revenue from participants in their programs, and they use those revenues to pay the instructors who run those programs, or the costs of those programs. Through 6 months, they were at $20,977 of revenue and $17,878 of expenses. We're asking you to authorize $60,000, same as last year, so they cannot grow the program any larger than that. I would tell you that both of those articles, they seem a little innocuous, but what they're really designed to do is to keep off-balance sheet, off-budget items from growing gargantuanly, and so that, the town has an opportunity every year to say, this is how much we want that stuff to grow. And it brings it back sort of as a check and balance.
I'm curious, as the elder population in Hingham grows, shouldn't we see a similar growth in the revolving fund?
I don't think you're going to see that because,
Well.
I don't think you're going to see that because they don't have any space.
Would somebody move, please, out there? Okay, time to wake up, guys. That's funny. Is that where the sensor is?
So right now we're bumping up into space considerations, as you know,
Yes.
and that's why we're looking for space for them. They're very close to having to say to folks, we can't provide any more participants in this class, and they got really close last year, and it's a nervous issue for them because they've never had to turn anybody away.
Well, I know they've had to limit the number for luncheons and little celebrations and parties, and that's why they end up usually at the country club.
So I don't think they're going to grow this right now until we can give them more space, and then I do think it'll grow dramatically. Because you're right, the study that we had, gentrology study, clearly said that we're going to be spending a lot of money in this area.
Favorable on Article L?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Article EE. This is asking the town whether or not they will accept the provisions of Chapter 32, Section 103J, and increase the cost of living adjustment for retirees to $13,000 from the base of $12,000 that is right now. So in our current retirement system, for municipal employees, and this does not include teachers, and other school employees that are eligible for the Mass Teachers Retirement Program. Right now, retirees receive a cost of living adjustment on the first $12,000 of their pension benefit, which equates to $360 a year. Town's been meeting that consistently since the town had the ability to do so about 9 years ago when the legislature gave the towns that opportunity. And they also, I think it was about 6 years ago, gave the towns the opportunity to increase the base in $1,000 increments to a maximum of $24,000. The retirement board, which is recommending this to you and is the only body that actually has to recommend this or can't go forward, they took a unanimous vote to recommend this to you. Primarily, if I can give you some of the discussion, this was on their agenda for 3 years, and for 3 years they said no because the system's not fully funded. So when a system is not fully funded, it means that it hasn't fulfilled its obligations or promises for past commitments. And so the struggle with the retirement board was, how can you provide a new benefit when you haven't paid for the old ones yet? The problem the retirement board faced themselves, and I think why they voted to include this number, is that the peer group that we have, including the teachers that are part of the mass retirement system, their bases have been increased by their entities because they are governed by the same laws. So all of a sudden, the Hingham municipal employee is an island to themselves. Everybody else has moved past 13 and higher. And so the board felt that it would be unfair to not move in that direction. This is the smallest step they can do. And while I say it's $360 per retiree, which might equate to about $100,000 a year in cash out the door every year, this is $1 million impact to the financial unfunded liability, $1 million per thousand. So it'll cost some time to pay this off.
Okay. Paul? No. Do you know, just offhand, do you know what the average pension is that would pay out today?
I don't have the exact numbers for us. I know we're a little bit above the state average, which is in the mid to low 20s, and we're just slightly above that. But our pensions are not as, there are some people who get large pensions, but they're by far and few between compared to the large bulk of our labor force that really, their pensions are going to be based on 80% of their maximum, and they're not. And of course, without any inflation adjustment, you're looking at that eroding very quickly with inflation. Now, granted, inflation's been pretty good the last few years, last decade or so, which has helped us, to some extent, not increase this base. But I think at some point in time, you create unequitable hiring market if we're going to be so far below everybody else, and then it's going to be too hard to catch up. So.
Nothing more? Paul?
I'll move that we recommend favorable action on Article EE.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I think we should also tell the viewing public they're not all this easy.
The next article is KK. We're hoping this can move into somewhat of a housekeeping article too, but sometimes there's some issues at town meeting with this. What we're doing here is we're asking that the town meeting grant the selectmen the authority to accept grants of easements for streets, water, drainage, sewer, utility purposes, or any public purposes on terms and conditions the board deems are in the best interest of the town or act anything relative thereto. Again, all this does is give you the ability to accept them. You can't pay for them, you can't buy them, you can just accept them. So if someone wants to give you an easement to something, this gives us the mechanism to legally accept that easement outside of the annual town meeting process. So this will be an approval for all of next year.
How many have we accepted this year?
None.
Okay.
It's not something we do often, but when we do it, usually we need to do it. I think we had this problem with drainage easements predominantly, where we just couldn't. Someone wanted to give us the ability to do something that we wanted to do that we thought would improve the roadway, but we couldn't do it because we needed the authority of town meeting. So.
Questions?
Yes. We would typically get a report from either the planning board or the highway department as to the condition of the roadway for purposes of its suitability for acceptance?
Correct.
Okay. Are the streets in question or the easements at issue identified at some point, or is this just a general blanket authority that we get?
Correct.
From?
It's a blanket authority allowing you to accept something if it's provided to you and you feel you need it. So all the conditions that you've indicated, Paul, you could certainly overlay on yourself by saying, first of all, we're not talking about streets, we're talking about easements. We could not accept a street by giving the Board of Selectmen blanket authority, because there's a very regimented process to accept a street. But an easement is something that you could, and you could obviously ask the planning board or any board or committee in town to review it for you before you wanted to accept it.
I'll take a motion.
I'll move to act favorably on Article KK.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Now we have two school ones. We're way ahead of schedule. Should we hold on this?
I think you should.
Yeah. And then let's maybe move to appointments, and we've got some other votes, and see if we can't get some of the reports out of the way for 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
How about, we're going to vote tonight on the CPC warrant articles. I'll ask for any further discussion before we take a vote. And this is a blanket vote on all of the projects. So, Mr. Healy, do you have any comments?
No, I do not.
And we did get a couple clarifications on, which I believe were sent out to everybody.
I read that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Gannon? Excellent. I think they're excellent projects. Bob Curley could not be here. He's out of town, and the vice chair had a babysitting issue. Otherwise, he would be here. I think they're great projects. I think a lot of work went into this, a lot of really, really critical thinking went into picking the projects and apportioning the money, and there's never enough money, because there's 2 projects that we all wanted very much, and there just wasn't enough money. So, any further discussion? Then I'll take a motion.
Recommend favorable action on Article O.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Want to do the couple licenses or one-day liquor permits?
I'll move that we approve the issuance of a special, well, do you want to do this one, Paul, or this for your buddy?
Sure.
For your St. Patrick's Day thing?
Sure. If I may, maybe it'd be appropriate if we have a minute or two. So the special one-day wine and malt beverage that Mr. Hoffman is requested is on behalf of the special needs athletic program. And last week when we were here, I mentioned that that I'm involved in that process to try to raise some funds for them. It's obviously a worthy cause. Tom and many other folks are very talented and motivated to help the programs that we've all been talking about, and they've been a huge success. I know you're on the board.
Yeah.
And I know Paul and I support it. And so the idea was, and a little more information they have now, is on March 20th, it's a Friday night, at the community center, Dan Gill, whose brother lives in town, and the boys of the Old Brigade will be playing at the community center from approximately 6:30 to 10:30. There'll be obviously a donation to attend, and also I know that they're looking for sponsors, and the money will go to support this very worthy program. So the benefit is we can celebrate St. Patrick's Day, albeit a couple days late, which never stopped folks from, because we always celebrate a couple days early with all kinds of events.
Isn't it a
through the town.
month-long thing?
Yeah, the first breakfast starts in early February, and there are so many events, like take too long to go through them. But any event, it's we can celebrate a holiday and a festive occasion at the same time, doing good and helping a worthy cause, the special needs program, and I'm looking forward to it. And I ask anybody out there that wants to participate, to help in any way, personally, financially, sponsor it. You could talk to Tom Hoffman. He'd be happy to accept your assistance.
And you can also watch on HCAM on one of the On the Issues that I do. I interviewed Warren Pellissier, who's the president of SNAP. And you'll get a very good feel about the programs we've already done and then what we want to do in the future. And it is extremely worthwhile doing this, and the kids have a ball.
It should be fun. So I'll move to approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverage liquor license to Tom Hoffman.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hey, do you want to do the reserve fund transfer, Paul?
Sure. I'll move that we approve a transfer from the reserve fund for litigation expense in the amount of $75,000.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Were we going to read the proclamation today, or just for the Lincoln? Just, thank you. Thank you very much. No, that's okay. Thank you. That's okay.
Yeah, that's good.
I had this in mind for you, Paul.
No.
No?
My throat is not up for the proclamation.
Why don't we go ahead and do the vote then?
Sure. I'll move that we proclaim Saturday, 7 February 2015, to be Lincoln Day in Hingham, and incorporate the proclamation into the minutes.
Happily second that.
Any further discussion? And just so, go ahead.
You go ahead.
You first.
I didn't want to steal your thing. I just ask if you maybe look in the journal or just check online. I know there's a number of events that are going to be scheduled for February 7th, Saturday, and it'll be a great way to remember Mr. Lincoln.
It starts about 10:45 or thereabouts with the militia visiting the grave, and then at 11 o'clock there's a program in Old Ship, and Jim Conroy is going to be the speaker this year. So it's really great. And then everybody walks up to lay wreaths at the Lincoln statue and it's neat. It really is. So, okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. Shall we do, Ted, do you want to do town administrator reports?
You have a reserve fund transfer?
We just did it.
Oh,
We did it.
Wow, you guys moving quickly.
Is there another one? Yeah.
No, that's it. If you did it tonight.
Trying to stay on time. This is very. And like I said, when we do some of the other warrant articles, we will not be going this quickly.
Surprisingly, all I have for you today is some costs. Some costs regarding the snow removal issues that we've been grappling with since the storm January 26th. From the DPW, and again, these are just DPW costs. We're experiencing costs in other areas. We've had additional costs in the police and in the fire department for overtime in each of those areas, and I'm sure that other departments have costs. We're tracking them because we do expect that, at least for the storm of the 26th, that we'll be able to get some FEMA reimbursement for that, because we do expect that that'll be declared a disaster. We spent $322,000 on that storm as of our calculations to date, a little less than our original estimates, but still pretty expensive. And then we spent about $190,000 on the storm just the past week. A bulk of what we're spending our money on right now is hauling. We're at the point now where we cannot plow the snow. We actually need to remove it. We were able, the folks at DPW, and I want to give them, and I'm sure, Mrs. Chairman, you'll do the same in your comments, but I want to give a shout out to the DPW folks. They've just been working tirelessly. I spoke to Mike Mullen a few days ago, and I wasn't sure he was going to be able to keep the conversation going. He sounded like he could barely stay awake. They've just been doing a great job. I know it doesn't always manifest itself in seeing perfectly clean streets, and some of the feedback we're getting right now is that why are we not cleaning the side streets and widening them up and getting to the sidewalks, and why are we still working on the main arteries? One of our problems is that we cannot allow those main arterial roads to be closed. The snow is so close to the edge that the DPW, police and fire, are worried that you might have to turn them into one-lane roads if we get any more snow. And so we need to clear that area so that we have a place to plow the next storm that we're going to get. And unfortunately, we are going to get another one. And the way this winter's working, I think we'll probably get a few more. If we could just get a little space in between for it to melt, that'd be great, but it's been so cold that it's not melting. And so first we were tackling the corners and widening the streets just for people to access and utilize, and for safety issues. Now we're actually just trying to create space for the next plow. So if you see us working on the main roads, not on the side roads, that's it. And then we're moving, we hit Crow Point completely one day, and then we went to a different neighborhood and moved through that whole area of the neighborhood. And so the DPW is moving through the town, neighborhood by neighborhood, with the trucks. Why do we do one neighborhood? Because we're going to drop a piece of equipment there that's going to be lifting it up. And putting it into a loader and taking it away, so it's not effective for us to be spread out all over the place. It's time-consuming work because it's not compacted snow, so not a lot of material goes in each one of those loaders, and off it goes.
They were using semis today over at the library. One of the things I'll talk about, we had a great day one of our library book sale, where I was most of the day. And I watched them literally load snow in semis and cart them off. And that was only at the library area, and it was still really quite dangerous pulling in and out. But I think they're doing a fabulous job compared to some of the other towns. They started on the downtown area at 2:30 this morning. So Mully's a little tired. I saw him about 4 o'clock today, and his eyelids were drooping a bit. Yeah,
and so, one of the things is, it's important for us to arrest them, too. I know people will say, well, why don't you just go get more contractors? There are no more contractors. We can't go to get the contractors in Rockland or in Abington.
We've already got them.
Because we got what we can, and those contractors are working there. So it really is, there's just no more resources available right now, and we do have to be cognizant of the fact that we need to rest. We can't let them work 20 hours a day.
Well, you also don't
day in,
want
day out.
tired people driving large pieces of equipment.
Correct. So.
No.
Just a question. So, Ted, on the numbers that you have, how does that relate, if at all, to any money we had budgeted for the removal?
Well, those two numbers equate to almost $500,000, a little more actually, and that's our budget. So, and we had some storms before then that we spent money on. We're, considerably over that budget, and I suspect that this is one of those years where we might set a record in what we spend compared to what we have. I don't think we've gone much over $1 million, but it's not going to take much to kick us over there. We're in better shape than most communities because we have not left our snow and ice budget to last year's number. Under state law, you can overexpend this budget. There's two budgets you can overexpend without town meeting authority or advisory or selectmen. Well, a selectman authority you need, but not advisory. You don't need to get a transfer, so to speak. And that's snow and ice and tax title. And so, excuse me 1 second, let there be light. Trick I have. A lot of communities just budget last year's number because the requirement to deficit spend is to budget last year's number. I think you all know that our advisory committee would never let that happen, and actually many years ago we started increasing that number. So we're close to our 10-year average, but a storm like this will push us past. I caution people about how much you want to put in because last year we spent $300,000. So if we allocate $600,000, because that's what our 10-year average is, that's a lot of money on the table if you don't actually have it that year. So you got to weigh the two out.
Okay, because on the average, for the 10 years, I think it's $550,000.
Correct.
And if I remember right, the most we've spent was $1.1 million one year. So let's hope we're not going to be overachievers. But I do think this is a good time to thank all of our first responders, both fire and police, but especially the DPW under Randy, and Mike Mullen is our highway supervisor who handles the snow plowing and handles those crews. So they have gone above and beyond, and they're going to be out there working again. So thank you all very much. We're very lucky to have each and every one of you. Shall we? I've got just 2 more things on my report. Should I do that? And then we'll maybe do your reports? The library is having a book sale. Today was the first day, and it was a very good day for the library. We'll also have the sale on Saturday from 10 to 4. So please come. These are gently used books, and we sell them at very, very economical prices. We've got the infamous coffee table books of every kind. We also have novels, hardback novels, 4 for $1. So you can get a bunch of books, a huge bag of books for very little money. We sell a bag of children's books, and the kids get to fill the bag for $2. So you can't go wrong. The kids have a great time picking the books. So please come by. We also have old books. And we actually had people lined up in the snow this morning waiting for us to open the doors. So please come by on Saturday. It'll be 10 to 4. And, important, we wish our wrestling team the very best of luck on Saturday. I believe they're going up against Duxbury, if I remember correctly. And if they win, they will be the Patriot League champs. I tried to make them the state champs, but I was wrong on that. So let's all root for the wrestling team, that they come through and become the Patriot League champs. They've got a great schedule. They've really, really done very well. So we wish them well. I'll start. Paul?
Sure. I'd like to echo your thoughts and words with respect to the work done by the Highway Department and Police and Fire. Couple of cautionary statements. I was contacted by a resident that I know really well, speaking to the issue of getting trapped between the gates when the train is going by. especially on the French Street. So please, please be very, very careful in this kind of weather. The T isn't going to be rushing out there to adjust the timing arms anytime soon, so it's up to us to be alert. I've spoken to the chief about it. I'd also ask that the residents help out the fire department by, if you live near a fire hydrant, don't be afraid to get a shovel and dig it out. If you live near, if there's a catch basin out in front of your house, it would be nice to pick up a shovel and dig it out. It's kind of a collective effort at fighting the season, and I think it'd go a long way. The chief asks, and you know, wouldn't it be a shame if there was a fire, a working fire, and simply couldn't get to the fire hydrant because it was buried in snow? So that's all I have to say, but good luck with the next storm.
Add one thing to the gates. We've had a number of rollovers over the last several weeks in the storm, so speed is not a good thing right now. Just be really, really careful with the roads. But our fire department and police have been very active, and that's been 2 or 3 rollovers, which is kind of you don't think of that in Hingham.
Can I just piggyback a little bit on what you said, Paul, because the chief, fire chief, was at our department heads meeting today and passed this message on to us too, and he really explained it very well. We have GPS locations on every single fire hydrant, so if we get a call, we're going to go to your house. You know, we know where the fire hydrants are approximately, and we're pretty close. But we're talking about snow banks now that are 5-6 feet high, you know, 4 feet, 6 feet deep, and you know they can run 50-60 feet long in between the driveways. What Mark Duff asked is, even if you can't get to the fire hydrant, you can't completely. If you can, you know, if you know where it is, if you can show the top of it, even all of that is helpful to us when we're trying to get there at the last minute. And the fire department is out, you know, digging out those fire hydrants. We have 650 of them in town. So it's going to be a little difficult for them to dig them all out, but so any help would be appreciative. I know sometimes, well, I can't dig through a 4-foot snowbank. Show us the top of it. That'd be great.
So just a couple of things. Of course, like we had last meeting with the last storm, I want to thank the DPW and the first responders for their work. It makes life more bearable with these storms and all the problems we have to deal with, so I want to thank them as well. Couple things, and it's not intentional. There's not a theme here about being Irish and St. Patrick's Day, but
Irish?
I am very proudly.
There's nothing wrong with that guy.
No, I'm kidding. But there's a 5K. I think it's called the Shamrock 5K on March 14th in Wampatuck. I think Hingham Little League is putting it on, and so you know, people have been taking it easy during the winter. They want to start stretching their legs for a good cause. That would be wonderful. I attended a forum last night in Cohasset for with their part of a coalition we have with Cohasset as part of the forum, the Drug Substance Abuse Task Force, and it was very well attended. They had some very remarkable people telling some facts that obviously give us pause, and my hope is that more and more people will be paying attention to this issue because it's not going away. It's getting worse in some respects, especially with the opiates. And we do have our own Town of Hingham Substance Abuse Coalition that's meeting February 11th at 5 o'clock. I think it's the East Room. That's a Wednesday. If you want to just come and get some information, it affects a lot of people and families, a lot of ages, and we're only a better community, a stronger community if we know how to fight this thing. So I just would welcome anybody that wants to come.
Thank you. That's it, Ted, for you? Okay. Why don't we do the 2 warrant articles since John is here? John, do you want to join us for the SPED fund and the school bus lease? Or Ted, do you want to take us through it?
I think it would be better
if John does it.
John or Dot?
John.
You want to at least take us through the leasing one? I know that's going to be what you're working on.
We waited for you. Oh, no, that's okay. We're actually ahead of schedule for a change.
So the warrant article for the bus lease, we have intentions next year of buying, or leasing new buses, and that would be done through an open public procurement. And in order to do that, typically when you lease a new bus, I mean, the life of the bus is well over 5 years, but public procurement laws normally would only let us enter into a lease for 3 years. So what we're asking through this article is to allow to get a majority vote approval so that we can enter a lease of 5 years for new buses. As a practical matter, if we tried to do a lease for 3 years, the cost would just be exorbitant during those 3 years. So really, any vendor that would lease such buses to us would have to do that. They'd want some assurance that you're going to have at least 5 years so that they can discount the buses over that period of time.
Paul?
How many buses?
What the plan right now, we operating 20 buses right now. And typically the way the lease would be structured is we'd put in the number of buses, which I would anticipate, at least 20. Initially, in this year's budget, we had 21, but we've since reduced one in order to make efforts to reduce the budget. We do have grown enrollment. We have a big bump going into the middle school next year, which really is sort of the driving force for the number of buses because of the volume of kids. So what we would do is we'd probably enter one for 20 years, and then we'd put in there how much if we were to lease an additional bus during any given year. Okay, that's typically the way you'd handle it. So it will allow us to grow or to shrink if need be.
You said 20 years, but you meant 20 units.
20, did I say, yeah, 20 buses. I'm sorry, yeah. 20 buses for 5 years. That's, that would be the standard. They would provide a spare with that agreement, yes. With at least 20, but they would have to provide a spare because if a bus goes down.
Which it has, I've heard.
Yeah, they have, yes. So we've always had at least 21 buses on the lot.
If I understand the structure, though, you're not asking the Board of Selectmen, ultimately town meeting, to approve the number of buses. You're simply asking for you to approve the ability for them to lease for a longer period than 3 years.
That's correct, to lease it for a period of 5 years.
The current lease is up this year? Or?
Yes, the current leases was, we had these buses, we entered into a 5-year lease back, I think, in 2007. And then 3 years ago, we entered into a 3-year lease for the same buses. Really, you can't really say the same buses because it has to be open bidding for any vendor. So we entered into a lease to say we'd take a bus of that age for the next 3 years, and it turned out the same bidder, which was First Student, won the bid. And that probably would be typical of what we would try to do the next time. We're going to write another bid this year to extend, it's not to extend our lease, but we'll enter into a bus lease this year for our existing buses for a 3-year, but I'd structure it as a 1 year with 2 1-year renewals, because the intention next year is to do new buses because the buses are getting too old. So at some point you have to replace them, but trying to go through a process of mitigating the impact on the town and on the financing. So, we'll structure it slowly so we do the right things for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. G.
I think that's my only question. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more?
Good, thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
I'll take a motion.
I recommend that the board vote favorable action on Article TT.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ted, do you want to take us through the stabilization fund, or John, do you want to?
I could tell you the background of it, but I think you really need to hear from the school department.
Was Linda going to do it?
No.
Somebody from the school committee or the
Okay.
Board of Selectmen needs to speak to it.
Okay.
Okay.
The written article, thanks, thank you. Good. So this is, last year in town meeting, we voted for home rule legislation, I believe, in order to create a stabilization fund if that's the correct wording for it, for the town, that could basically be used for special education purposes. In the event that during our budget process, all of a sudden we come up with an extraordinary special education, new tuition, or transportation, I believe. And with that home rule legislation, I believe it was approved back in January or at the end of the session last year. So and I think at the end of last year, we did have a balance that we returned to the town, well in excess of $750,000, I think. And I think the school committee had voted to ask the town to use $250,000 of that to fund this home rule stabilization account should it get approved. Now that it has been improved, this article would really be presented before the town to ask the town to take that $250,000 and actually move it to the stabilization fund. Is that?
This is going to be very good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good.
I think this is going to be a great help if we get hit along the way with either some of these organizations bumping up tuition, because I've seen DOT get in the middle of a budget year and hit a $30,000 or $40,000 increase for one child.
And I would clarify that the intent of this really isn't for things that happen up and through the budget process, because those are things that we know about, and however costly they may be, we have an ability to plan for them. The intent of this fund was for things that would happen after the budget has already been appropriated, and are things that were unanticipated or under budget or move-ins, that kind of thing.
Which
Thank
can
you.
be very frequent.
Yes.
It's a very, very fluid arena, the special education.
Paul?
Does this fund grow from year to year?
The fund could grow from year to year, and I think it was tapped out at about 2% of the operating budget. I think that's the
There is a max
the
on it.
maximum that
Yeah.
was established on that balance. So as of right now, it doesn't automatically grow, Paul, but if we had a balance at the end of the year, perhaps we would do the same thing and ask that money to be reserved so that we could ask the town in the next year if we could, in fact, move that to the stabilization fund, which would really cover us in the event that after we go through this budget process or during the middle of the year, we take a big tuition in, and, they can range to, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or sometimes they're cheap, too. Sometimes they could be only $50,000, but it's still a hit to our budget, to the way we manage our finances.
Mr. G? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take a motion.
Sure. I'll move that we recommend favorable action on Article JJ.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks, John.
Sorry I wasn't here earlier. I thought-
Oh, no, we held it. We did all the other stuff at the bottom of the agenda. How do we want to do this? Because now we move into the joint session with advisory and the school committee. What if we put the chairs?
Yeah, I'm going to move from here. You don't need me to be here. And
Chair? If we bring another chair, can we put the chair and vice chair of each? And just bring two more chairs up? And Tom, come on up. No. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'll stay here. We'll put the chair and vice chair of school committee over there. And then, I think that's probably the max. Hi, Carol. Where's Ray?
Because attendance, I think there might be some people sitting in the back.
Oh. Because I know I saw him kind of come in. Sharon, I think there's enough room for you to stay, if you want to stay. Or you good? Okay. You still have that? You didn't get it from me. Who else should we, actually, Ted should come back. Who, Ray, who's gonna do the presenting, Dot?
Yeah, I'm going to have some remarks and then...
Okay. So we actually could bring Ted back up here. Where did Ted go?
I go see if he's outside.
Okay.
As soon as Doc gets back.
Well, we're missing Ted too, so. Oh, was he? Ted, come on, we've got room. Come on back up. We could try and get everybody around the table. That would be good. How about coming in? How about, why don't you move in the middle? Or that way? Okay, everybody move. Mary, do you want to convene your committee?
Oh, certainly, thank you. I'd like to call the advisory committee to order at 8:10 p.m.
Ray, do you want to call the school committee to order?
Let's call the school committee to order. Call it 8:10.
Is everybody here?
We have 4.
We have 5.
5.
Andy is here.
Yeah, there we go.
So I'd like to welcome everybody. This is our joint session with the advisory committee and the school committee to hear the school budget for the coming year. And Ray, you're going to have remarks?
Yeah, I need Dot because
Oh.
she's actually printing something for me. I had a little printer failure as I was getting ready to leave the house. But maybe what I'll do until she's coming is just kind of review what our remaining calendar is for the budget season, so folks at home will have a sense. So tonight we have what's the annual presentation to the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee of the school budget as it currently stands. The next meeting of the school committee is the 9th. We actually are going to have some further discussion in our school department conference room this evening after we leave this joint session, particularly on full-day kindergarten. Regular school committee on the 9th and the 23rd. And the 23rd will be our formal public hearing on the budget, as well as the school committee vote on the budget. And my understanding is that that Thursday of that week, the advisory committee will vote all of the budgets, and I don't yet know what the selectmen intend to do with respect to our budget vote. But that's where we stand.
Have we set a date yet? Is it the 26th or is it March 5th?
I think we're targeting the 26th, so we're ahead of advisory. So they're going to be.
Yeah, we should be ahead of advisory.
Our input on that.
That's
Yep.
the Thursday.
Right.
I confirmed that with Betty this morning.
Right. Okay. So you are going to meet the same night. Okay. So those are our remaining dates, and if it's anything like last year, the numbers could even change after the votes come in. Certainly last year, we got some new information that that kind of informed some decisions even after votes were taken. Prior to town meeting, and ultimately what was presented for the town vote at that time. So this has been a long process, something we started back in September, and I know advisory's already spent quite a bit of time delving into our budget during the month of January, and will continue to do so. I know the education subcommittee has already had some sessions, and we'll have some additional sessions. So there's quite a bit left of work left on this budget before it's wrapped up. So, sorry for the delay. Do we have music that plays during the silence, or?
We could do the funny figures on the screen, but
Need a cavity filled?
that is true.
Or you can take a 5-minute recess.
Should we take a 5-minute recess while Dot? Why don't we take a 5-minute recess? So we're not all sitting here staring at each other.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Consider that the 7th inning stretch. So now I will turn it over to Ray.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the delay. I do have a few remarks to make. This is kind of the one opportunity to speak before the advisory committee and the selectmen and to the folks at home with respect to the budget. So I think it's an important few minutes to just take at the outset of this before Dot begins. Good evening. Tonight you'll see and hear the currently proposed school budget for the school department for fiscal year 2016, with a public hearing scheduled, as I mentioned, before the school committee on February 23rd and votes by all three boards represented here tonight to occur the same week. This is still very much a work in progress. The budget proposal has already evolved since its first presentation to the school committee on January 8th, and it will surely change further in the weeks to come. New information will become available, greater insight into available resources will be shared, and hard decisions will be made. Our hope is that in the end we can come to an agreement on a school budget for next year that will provide the quality of services our residents expect and deserve while addressing the growing and evolving needs of our students, all in an affordable and responsible way. The school committee and administration began to discuss this budget conceptually last September during its third annual planning session. The results of that meeting provided the direction necessary for the administration to formulate a budget proposal that includes and aligns with the school committee's priorities for the delivery of educational services to the children of Hingham. This proposal reflects and reaffirms an approach to budget formulation began 2 years ago, focusing on needs rather than available revenue as a starting point. Of course, the intention remains that we can meet the needs of our students in a manner that is affordable, and I believe that we can. Dr. Gallo and John Ferris will speak to specifics and details of the budget with particular focus on 4 areas of need the proposal seeks to address. In a moment, Dot will begin her presentation, I believe, with a glimpse into who we are as a school department. For those who were at this meeting a year ago, this may not be unfamiliar. I think for many, the realization of sheer size and complexity of the department will be enlightening. The time spent highlighting the differences of our department is not intended to suggest that our needs are any more important than those of any other town department, but rather to convey that they should be viewed differently because of the unique nature of the challenges we face and the variability and uncertainty about a great many factors that can have significant impact. In general, it's fair to say that our overall student enrollment continues to grow, though at varying rates at different levels, and we must provide an appropriate level of staffing to maintain reasonable and manageable, if not ideal, class sizes to support and promote optimal learning. Our educators and staff work hard and deserve to be fairly compensated for their contributions. In addition, the makeup of our student body continues to experience changes in the nature and extent of services required relative to learning, physical, social, and emotional and health support needs. It has become increasingly challenging to maintain our grounds and facilities in an acceptable manner, particularly with a new school and athletic facilities now open for business. New and increasing mandates require more and more time and resources every year. Our capital budget request continues to address the technology needed to meet the challenges associated with providing a 21st century education, as well as many other facility and infrastructure needs. Certainly, we are fortunate to have some new and renovated buildings and equipment, but some of our older assets are beginning to show age. Replacement and maintenance is required and cannot be forsaken. We are also fortunate to boast great success by our students. As recently reviewed reports confirm, scores are consistently high and standardized tests and culminating exams, and nearly all graduates continue their education formally, many at some of the most prestigious colleges. Our approach to budgeting may be a little frustrating for some, but as Dot will explain, the concept of level services is a relatively new one in town budgeting and is not a natural method of formulating and evaluating budgets for the school department. The reality is that it simply costs more year to year to provide a certain level of services, and moreover, many of us believe that we should not be satisfied with merely sustaining the educational product we deliver. And if level service is the guideline we are to use, whose definition of that term do we follow? Is level services the provision of the same level of services we had last year? What kinds of increases are permitted in that circumstance? or as level service is the provision of an appropriate level of services under the circumstances, taking into account required obligations, reasonable adjustments for increased enrollment and other needs, and including the introduction of new initiatives that enhance the learning experience for our students. New initiatives deserve exploration to improve and expand what we do in order to prepare our students for the future. Those things cost money, and we owe it to our children to do everything we can to make their time with us the best it can be. This year, a key initiative is the expansion of our kindergarten program. We've spent considerable time on this issue, and after much study and discussion, we've concluded that kindergarten is educationally necessary. That is the principle that has informed and shaped our approach, which you'll hear more about, and which we'll continue to discuss later this evening and in the coming weeks. In the end, while we focus on the needs of our students, we do so with reasonableness in mind. We are always striving to strike the appropriate balance between need and affordability. Moreover, we are team players, and conservative managers returning unexpended funds each year that help fill the town coffers and bolster our financial standing. We are grateful for every dollar earmarked for education, and those funds are put to good use, yielding visible results. We look forward to working with all of you over the next several weeks to arrive at a budget that meets the needs of the district at a price that Hingham can afford. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Dr. Gallo?
Okay, so Ray said, likely he's going to do the slide about who we are. And in fact, I thought a lot of you had seen that and perhaps wouldn't do that. However, I have it handy and we'll take a look at it. So I'll go through this quickly because a lot of folks who attended the Saturday meeting saw it as well. But it does, I think, speak to how we are perhaps different from some of the other departments and town entities. So we're a family-centered institution, not that most of the town departments aren't, but that's our major function, our major part of our identity. We have a diverse population, 4,300 students that we're responsible for. They're ages 3 to 22, and these are our clients, and these clients we see every day. We're a mandated service provider, and that meets lots of pieces of responsibility. Certainly special needs, federal civil rights, which are Chapter 504 plans, but other kinds of mandated providers, whether it's providing services that prevent bullying or providing services for students who are suspended or excluded from school for long periods of time, and so on. There are many other mandates that we have. We're the town's largest employer, more than 600 employees, more than 600 regular employees, bargaining groups, teachers, 328 in our teacher group, and our next biggest group numbers more than 130 people, and that's a paraeducator group, and then all of the other groups, the support groups that follows those. We also are a recreational provider because we at least manage the resources that many of our young folks and older folks as well enjoy on a regular basis. We're caretakers and facilities managers. We have 10 buildings, 6 school buildings and 4 other buildings over at the depot. And all of the various square footages that I didn't put here. But we have multiple acres of fields and playing fields. We have probably, well, I know, not just probably, more roofs and more boilers and more elevators and more other things like that that can fall apart or break down or can discontinue functioning well at any point in time. You heard John talking about the buses. We're our own section of the MBTA, 20 big buses, a spare bus, our special education vans, a few maintenance vehicles, one of which bit the dust last week, along with some other DPW buses. And so we transport more than 2,000 of our youngsters to and from school each day, and to various and sundry other kinds of activities in which they may participate. We run a restaurant every day, and we have about 1,000 clients. I think it's probably better this year because our percentage of food service participation is actually up. And these are very discriminating customers. And you know, if you have younger kids, you know, some younger kids only eat one thing at every meal, and others only eat certain brands of chicken fingers and so on. Very discriminating customers, and that's a complex function. We are complex. We serve many, many different functions within the town. So who are we and what kind of an entity are we? Certainly we're called the school department, so that is a department of the town, and but there are many differences and they impact our need for resources. Our sheer size in terms of number of employees and number of buildings, the number of acres and so on, the organizational structure that we have, the extent of stewardship we have for multiple properties, taking care of the fields that the town uses, taking care of the buildings that the town as well as school children use, taking care of the bus depot and garage spaces that many departments in the town use, taking care of the fuel depot that certainly everybody has used in the last week or so, and we've been able to keep that running. Probably, I think we're more like a division of the town that has its own departments. Just as the town side of government has departments, we are a division that has its own departments. And some of those parallel kinds of functions that we have. We have business and finance functions, just as the town does. We have recreational functions. We have library. We have maintenance and facilities and management, health management functions. Board of Health. We have behavior and rules enforcement, such as in the police department. So I think that we are a division of the town. So as you watch these slides that talk about our budget, we would hope that you would be attentive to the fact that we are different. All the different departments of the town and the divisions of the town are all important in their own way, but ours has some unique characteristics. So the slides I'm going to show, many of you have seen some of them, so there are a lot of familiar slides that have come from prior presentations if you've been at those. There are a few new slides, and there are some slides that have been changed from prior presentations. So I'm going to go through them quickly because you all have them there, and certainly I anticipate there'll be an opportunity for questions, but I'm not going to read every slide. You know, we start every year with challenges, and sometimes the same challenges on every list every year. Sometimes there are new ones. So special education is always a challenge because of the size of the budget, the number of tuitions, and that kind of thing. This year you're going to hear a lot of focus on facilities maintenance, and so that has taken a focus this year, and partly because we have new facilities and added facilities and different needs within, and as a result of the new facilities, we have a seemingly never-ending list of things that need to be fixed or repaired or maintained, and we have a backlog of those kinds of things. So you're going to hear about that. The bus lease, we've tried to take care of. You know, when we looked when I looked at the original budget that John kind of plunked in front of me with all the things that we thought we needed and hoped we could afford, my eyes always go to what are those big numbers, and is there something that we can do about those big numbers that might spread things out over more than 1 year, or that we might support in different ways so they don't have such an impact on the budget in any 1 year. And you're going to hear in this presentation that we've looked differently at the bus lease and how we're going to manage that so that we can spread that cost out. Regular education staffing, we have some anticipated retirements, few, 6 to be exact. We have contractual increases that are represented in this budget. All of our 6 bargaining units have finally come to agreements with us, and so the results of those new agreements, which start with the year that we're in, the 14-15 year, those are in the budget as well. The collective bargaining process, when I wrote this slide for the first budget presentation in early January, we hadn't yet settled with all of our units, and so it's complex to do a budget where you have to have some money as an allowance for those things you haven't yet settled, and then move numbers over time. It's kind of like a moving target from the allowance into the part of the budget in which they belong, the personnel accounts in which they belong. And then we had the full-day kindergarten initiative, and I'll talk a bit about that as well. And we made some changes in that proposal since the beginning. Ray mentions it's a needs-based budget, and so what does that mean? Well, it means it's, first of all, it's a proposal from the administration to the school committee, and right now, this budget that you're looking at tonight is a proposal. It's the administrative budget still at this point. The school committee has yet to act on this budget, and over the next several weeks, there will be individual actions and finally a vote on February 23rd. And I'll just mention that we had originally thought that we might have the formal, required, open, public presentation of the budget this coming Monday night, but we need to do some more deliberating and prioritizing and so on. So that public hearing of the budget, which has to be posted, will be now on the 23rd prior to the committee taking action on the budget. So a needs-based budget is one where wherever actual costs are known, we use those. And when we make projections, we use current costs. We use what we know about other things, like projecting for the middle school, where we don't yet have a year of operation. We can look back to what happened at East School when we opened for the first year and use that data. So it's always a database, not just a wild guess or a thought about what the funding might be. And it's the one where needs are broadly defined, and I think this is the most important bullet on the slide, because they're defined to encompass responses to enrollment. That's kind of a no-brainer. People tend to understand that. But there also needs are defined to take care of a changing demographic profile, and quite honestly, that is absolutely true in this town. And whether you look at the town as a whole or you look at the student body, there's a changing demographic profile. Those children come to us, and we have to provide for them. We have a backlog of program and service and facilities deficiencies. We worked our way through that. In terms of things like the new buildings and money that have been put into the older buildings, so that's terrific, that's great. But there are always things that need to be done. And some of the things are a result of prior cuts, some of the things about never having enough money for capital, and despite the good work of the Capital Outlay Committee over the years, there's only so much money that they could spend. So there's always a backlog of things, so some of our needs are the result of that. And then we also have needs as a result of mandates and school committee priorities and community expectations. Everybody seems to want something from the school department, and some people want everything, and of course that's not possible. And not all the things that people want are common to all. So that's a need-based budget. Now I'm glad you have the paper, because this never shows up well on the slide, but this is our original budget slide, and I would just call your attention to the lines down at the bottom. First of all, the blue reflects the regular education budget. The green reflects the special education budget. And the red, which is a very small budget this year, reflects our responsibilities under vocational education. And so at the time we originally put this together, the budget that we were proposing was $46,572,683, and that's down near the bottom of the slide. And that was an increase over the prior year's budget of $3,081,961. That's a big number. And so that's the point at which I went back up and began to look at those big things and what can we do about some of the big things that are there. Special education, of course, was a big number, and the personnel account was a big number, and transportation, as we mentioned, and so on. And so that's where we began thinking about, oh my goodness, it's a big number. What is it we can do to mitigate those numbers? You will note also there, below the bottom line of the $46 million request, there was the amount that we project to be the cost of providing that second half of the school day, and that was a cost of $844,000. We're going to come back to that at the end of this presentation, but that was there. And so if you then added that to the bottom line of the $46 million, you ended up with $47,416,683. And throughout the presentation today, presentations, we have kept the kindergarten costs all in one place, just so one can see what the magnitude is and how we can handle the funding plan. And I'm glad it went out this time. How we can handle that funding plan. So you will see that, but of course ultimately as that kind of a program gets incorporated, then the various pieces of it get moved up ahead, and most of them fall into the blue or the green categories. So part of the budget was looking to add some things that are new, all that represent needs, but that are new needs. So you have 2 pages here to this slide, and I want to point out a couple of things about them. First of all, the base. The base budget is what we had last year, but reviewed, and not just carried from one year to the other. So we look at the FY, in this case, 15 budget, and we say, what did we spend for these various things? What do we know about new costs for those things? What do we project in the case of things like gasoline and utilities and those kinds of things, and the price of paper and all of that? And we come up then with a new base. And then we look at the requests that have been put in by principals, by department directors, by our other folks in maintenance and in the other departments in technology and so on. And so the things that are in the middle column that says high are the things that were recommended either by one of us at central office, because we have some unique responsibilities for certain categories, or by principals or by directors. And that gives you the grand total. What I didn't put here is a list of things that were requested that we didn't put into the budget, that we felt couldn't be a priority this year. So you can look down, and that's the original request, and we're going to look at some changes we've made, but you'll see that some of the items are bolded. And those bolded items are things that we either removed or modified in some way at our last budget meeting, which was on the 29th. So that means that we have a new bottom line. There were 2 lists of those things that were bolded, and then you can see some of the dollars crossed out. They've been removed from the request. And here's that list summarized. So this is all the bolded things summarized in a different way. And if you look down at the very bottom of this slide, you'll see that we had the base budget for FY15. This is at the very bottom of the page, and that was the 43,497.22 number. And then we had the original request, which was on the prior slide, of the 46,572,683, and the change. And we were able to make an adjustment, as shown on this slide, that reduced the bottom line by $381,692. And that was a combination of things. That was taking out some things that we really originally wanted, but knowing that this budget is a very large number, that we might be willing to move it this time. It was things like the changes we made in how we will handle the transportation, the bus lease situation. And it's just some circumstantial changes. We had another retirement that we anticipate. We had a special ed student that moved back to the Hingham Public Schools from being in an outside placement just last week. And that's a wonderful thing, and that reduced the budget. So it's a combination of things that are in this category. So we now have a new budget, and so the blue, remember, is regular education. And so if you look at the bottom line for regular education, you'll see that it's now sitting, that piece of the budget, at a 5.92% increase. And the green, again, is special education. And if you look there, you can see that the bottom line there for the new budget is 8.3% increase. And that's a big number, and we'll talk about the why of that in a minute. And then the vocational, which has stayed the same. So the overall budget then, with all of those categories added together, is a 6.21% increase. That's where we are now as of last Thursday evening. We always have to remind people that the budget is really a net budget, which means that in certain sections of the budget, the actual costs are offset by things like grants, things like revolving accounts. And this is divided into 2 categories. So our special education budget, the bottom line number you see in the special education budget, has already been offset by the IDEA grant. That's the only federal money we get for special education, and that's a big amount of money every year. And then there are some smaller things, an early childhood grant, and Circuit Breaker. Circuit Breaker is really the only state funding for special education, and it comes to us in the form of a reimbursement for children whose services cost a great amount of money. Last year, and you can see that in the line, if you look at the line for circuit breaker last year, we got $1,160,184 in that. And so that was a big amount of money to offset last year's budget. This year, we have $942,740, and while that's a good amount, a good sized budget, actually, it meant that we started this budget about $200,000 in the hole because we're getting less reimbursement. So that's one of the reasons the budget is bigger. One of the reasons is we're spending more on the services that are needed, and we'll talk a little more about that, but the other reason is we're getting less reimbursement, and that combination means a bigger increase in that budget. So all in all, offsetting special education is $2,181,002, and so the gross cost of the special education budget is 13, but what you see on the bottom line in the green sheet is 10,885,509 because it has been offset by those grants in most cases. So down at the bottom, the regular education budget isn't offset by as much, so it's offset by a total of $422,774. Much of that in revolving accounts. You know, we have an athletic fee, we have a tuition revolving account that takes the tuitions for the typical children who come to our integrated kindergarten or preschool programs. And we have other places, fields fees and so on, go into a revolving account. So there are offsets from those accounts to the regular education budget. So the total in offsets that we have is $2,603,776. And so that, of course, means that the real cost of what this budget represents is $2 million higher than what the bottom line there is. So we're certainly fortunate that we have those offsets. We appreciate them. But it is important that you remember that this is a net budget overall. You know, there are a lot of ways you can sort out a budget. And so one way of looking at a budget is to look at the different categories, programs that the budget funds. So there's regular education, regular instruction, and just about 50%, 51% of the budget that you have in front of you supports regular education. That's the blue part, and you notice even in terms of how it's represented in the blue and the green and the red. You know, they're smaller numbers of categories, smaller budgets. And the next biggest piece is special education. That's the red. It's about a quarter. This year, I think it's 23.6%. So that's all the different special education functions. That covers the things that happen in our schools every day with our own special education staff and our therapists and so on. And then it also includes those tuitions, which are very costly for a smaller number of kids. And then there's a part that covers the custodial things and maintenance and so on, counseling and health, and you can see the categories there. So that's one way of kind of taking a cross section of the budget and looking at what the pieces of it are. It's another way of looking at it that's a little bit simpler but probably has a greater shock value, and that is that here's a budget where there are only three categories. Everything is put into three categories. Personnel, which is at 82%. 82% of the budget is personnel. And I always say that's a given, you know, because that's contractual in most cases. We have individual contracts, we have our collective bargaining contracts, and then we have some people who don't work under a particular contract. But that's a given. And someone always in the audience says, well, not really a given because you could let people go, which, of course, unfortunately has happened from time to time, and that's one way of controlling that. But other than that, we tend to know what those numbers are, and it's 82% of the budget. Contracts, and that would include things like tuitions, it would include the bus lease and other things like that. That's about 15% of the budget. But again, those are givens, because if those are contracts or they're special ed tuitions, they're not choices that we have to make. And that little green slice there, which is 3%, that's what pays for things like paper, textbooks, computers, a very little piece of money that we have much flexibility with. So I always try to give you information about the new things that are FTEs, and these are teacher kinds of FTEs, full-time equivalents. These are people. There's always a concern that when you add people, then you add benefits and so on. So in this budget now, because we've taken out one FTE, it's a total of 8.825 FTEs. That includes a maintenance person, it includes a new role of a facilities manager and procurement officer, and then the rest are teaching positions. Of the 8.825, they're not all new people, because over on the right, I've pulled out the FTEs that really are extensions of existing positions. So if somebody's working half-time and already has benefits, the fact they're now going to work full-time doesn't mean that we pay a different set of benefits. So of the 8.825, there's 2.225 that are new FTEs. And you should know as well, of course, the biggest benefit is health insurance that the town gives, and that our health insurance this year is, for the teachers, it's 52%. For the other bargaining units, it's less than that. For one bargaining unit, it's a percentage that is in the teens, and by percentage, I mean the percentage of people who participate. But on average, over the last several years, for the teachers, it's been about 50%. So if you take the total number of new FTEs and you say, well, on average, if there are 6 of them, then we would assume that only half of those would elect benefits. So it's just an important thing for you to know. And that's as the budget stands. I've got a bunch of slides here. I'll go through them quickly about enrollment. We've grown about 600 students over the last 10 years. It's been about 60 kids a year. Pretty steady rate of increase, and you can see there. So for the current year, the enrollment is 4224. That doesn't include the pre-K. This is simply K to 12. So it doesn't include the 70 kids we have in pre-K. Doesn't include the 4 kids that we have out in vocational school, and it doesn't include the 47 or 46, I think as it is of today, children that are in outside placement. So that brings the total of kids for whom we have responsibility, either fiscally or programmatically or both, to 4346. So that's our official enrollment pre-K through 12. The high school and middle school enrollments are the ones that are growing, because our largest elementary classes are moving into the middle school. Last year we had 388 students in the 5th grades across town, and we thought, well, some will go off to private school, you know, they won't all move into the middle school. Well, you know what? We opened the middle school with 388 kids. Now, probably they weren't exactly the same 388. Probably some kids moved out and new kids moved in. But the point is that the net in and out resulted in the same number of kids. And then we have a group of like 384 that are moving into the middle school for next year. So the middle school enrollment is going up. But also the high school enrollment is going up, and the main reason for there is we don't have the big classes yet. In a couple of years they'll be there, but the big classes aren't yet in the high school. But when you have a class entering the high school of 300 kids and the graduating class is something like 272, then the high school does in fact grow, even though it isn't with the biggest classes. Elementary enrollments over the last several years have gone down. And part of the reason for that is that our kindergarten enrollment has been all over the place. I'll show you the kindergarten slide in a minute. So you have fewer kids in kindergarten, but yet we have picked up somewhere between 50 and 67, I think it was last year, youngsters that join us in grade 1. They didn't go to kindergarten in our schools, but they joined us in grade 1. So this looks as if there's a steep decline in the elementary enrollment. However, I would ask you to look at this. The kindergarten is been steadily going down. Is that a function of our not having a full-day program? We don't know. We don't know that. But we do know that last year, our kindergarten was 295 kids. This year, it's 245 kids. And I think until we have the full-day program and have a couple years under our belt, we won't have a good way to predict what our enrollment is going to be in the higher grades. We need that information, and we think that it will stabilize and we'll know better where we're going. This is an interesting one. So here's the kindergarten. Oh, sorry. So there's the kindergarten, and you might draw one conclusion just looking at that. But now look at this. If you take the total height of those bars, meaning the pink plus the green, that's grade 1 enrollments over the years. So it doesn't present that same picture of classes going down in size overall. And you can look at all of those numbers, and there's that the green is the bump that is from 1 year's kindergarten to the next year's first grade. So starting back in, if I go back to 2009-10, 33 more kids in grade 1 than were in the prior year kindergarten. The next year, 38. The next year, 50. The next year, 67. Last year, 48. And this year, 61 more children are in our first grade than were in our kindergarten. And we know that there are a few people who move to town and have a child entering kindergarten, but we also know that there are many people who are sending their children to a private kindergarten. So those are interesting graphs to look at. Of course, each one has different scales, and so you really have to look at all of them to get a picture. This is a monthly enrollment chart, and I know it's hard to see except for the paper copy, but it's well worth studying, because up in the left corner you have the middle school, in the right corner you have the high school, and then the big chart in the middle is the 4 elementary schools, actually broken down by individual class sizes. And the reason this is important is it gives you a sense of motion. For example, if you look at the 202 in the lower right-hand corner, which is our current enrollment in the elementary, there are 384 kids that will go from the 5th grade up to the middle school to the 6th grade next year. At the same time, 301 kids are leaving the middle school and they're going over to the high school. So you have a sense of the flow from this chart. The other thing is that when I'm going to tell you in a minute, or show you in a minute, that our elementary enrollment for next year is projected to be down. And the natural conclusion would be, my God, if you have fewer kids in elementary, why don't you have fewer teachers there? And so I usually say, so look at this chart, and you find the place here where we could take out a teacher without class sizes going up, and in some cases fairly drastically. And there are a couple places where we might have to consider a teacher coming out in order to fund some other things that also have a high priority. But there are a lot of places where you can simply see, pick any grade level, if you take a teacher away and take the same number of kids and divide by a number that's one smaller, you get something undesirable happening, and that is class size growing. Down at the bottom, these are the other categories of children for whom we have responsibility that I mentioned before. The children who are in special education, our preschool. 74 youngsters in the preschool at East. Now that 74 is a combination of about half of children with special needs. So maybe 36, 37 kids in that group have special needs. We have to provide for them from age 3, and so they're there, and they are there free. And then, because the program has to be an integrated one, meaning there need to be typically developing peers in those classrooms, we have 37 more kids. And those youngsters pay a tuition fee for running that program. And then the out-of-district kids, this is the chart from December. And on December 1, we had 48 youngsters who were out of districts and special ed. That number can change almost daily, and we had only 4 youngsters that were in vocational school. Another way of looking at the projections is what we really do is we guess at kindergarten entry. And then we, for K to 5, so we guess at what will come in. We guess at what that bump will be, knowing what the numbers have been over the past few years. So we know how many kids are moving from 5 to 6, and so we can come up with a pretty good projection. The big unknown is that first number, guessing at how many kids will enter as kindergarten. We're projecting for next year, as we're thinking about a full day, 300 kids. Where do we have the 300 kids, given that we only have 245 this year? We said, you know what? it is likely that we'll have 50 or 60 more kids who will come for first grade. And so if we have 245 in kindergarten, can we assume that those extra 50 or 60 likely will come to kindergarten if we have one, a full-day kindergarten if we have one? For 6 to 8, that's pretty easy. You look at who's coming in from 6th grade and who's going out from the 8th grade. We always assume that we'll have some youngsters who are going to private school from the middle school. And that's even truer now than it used to be, because most of the private parochial schools around have, in fact, begun programs starting in grade 7. And so we have more kids, not more kids going out in total to a school like BC High or Notre Dame or Xaverian or whatever, but likely going earlier. So we have assumed 15 kids in that number, and that would give us 1088 projected for middle school. And then in grades 9 through 12, we look at who's graduating, and we look at who's coming in from the 8th grade, and we make an assumption there. And those numbers have been small in the last few years. In fact, this past year, I think net, we didn't have anybody going out, but we made a guess of 15 kids. So the whole scenario is that we think that the elementary grades are going to be down. Not a lot of movement between 1 and 5, but overall down, because if it's a smaller kindergarten and a bigger class going out, that's what the difference is. And we will be up in the middle school, and we'll only be kind of level at the high school. Last year we did have a big bump up at the high school, but this year we're not expecting that. Although the big bump up from last year in 9th grade will move to 10th grade. These projections assume no in and out migration. And we know from our data that in and out migration overall brings more in than out. There's a ratio from year to year that is about 1.1, 1.2 ratio. So let's look at some of the things that have a big impact on this budget, at least dollar-wise. Special education, if you look at that budget, remember special education is the green one there in the middle of your budget chart at the beginning. So how does that break down? Well, 58%, and that's the big blue sector there, 58% of that budget, over $6 million, is for teaching services. So these are the services that provide for the children that go to school here. And that involves, I'll show you in a minute a slide that has the actual personnel, but that includes special education teachers, it includes occupational and physical therapists, it includes speech and language folks are in there, the reading teachers are in there. So all of the kinds of services that are needed are in that budget. There's a transportation piece. You know, many of our kids, the kids that go to school every day here, obviously ride on the regular school buses. But we have children that go to out-of-district kinds of places, and some children that live here in town who, for whatever reason, do need to go in a van rather than on a school bus. So that's a big chunk. Many of the individual placements are placements that are some distance away, and so we do a bid for that transportation. We participate with the regional collaborative that provides services, so that for some of those trips where we might have one child and there's one in Cohasset and one in Hanover, maybe they can all go together at a reduced rate. But the per diem rates for some of these transportations, when it's a singleton kid going to a place like Beverly, can be up to $300 a day, in addition to the tuition for the program that exists. So over the years, you can see the special education budget and how it's grown in terms of being a percentage of the regular education budget. And all of those years where there's nothing in the circuit breaker column meant there was no circuit breaker. We didn't get any support. On the other hand, the percentage of the total operating budget was not a big percentage. And then you can see in 2004, circuit breaker came along, and originally there's a formula for funding it, but originally it was never funded up to the limit, the maximum. And then you can see that the numbers have gone up over time. Part of that's related to special education costs have gone up, cost of tuitions, for example, and some of the other services that folks might get. And down at the bottom, you can see the difference between the circuit breaker money, reimbursement money that supported last year's budget, which is the $1,160,184, and the circuit breaker money that's supporting this year's budget, which is $942,740. And that difference is kind of the dent that was in our budget when we started. These are just, I think, slides that may be of interest. Children who are served in our district, you look at their primary disabilities, and in the category primary disabilities, health is a big category, and then another big category is learning disabilities, as you might expect. We can manage in this district most children that have learning disabilities. That's one of the categories there. Every child has a primary disability, while many of our children have multiple disabilities. There's always one that's listed as the primary, because multiple disabilities as a category is there as well. So for the children who are educated out of the district, one might expect that they have different kinds of needs, more serious needs, more pervasive needs. And so there, if you look at the categories, the category multiple disabilities as a primary category is a big one, 20 kids out of the 46, 47, 48 that it's been over the fall and now. And autism being another big category here, 12 students. We have a number of children with autism that are on that spectrum who are served here in our district, and their needs are more moderate, and we can serve them within district. There are others that need to be in other placements. Special education enrollment, a total of 584 children in all that have IEPs. Of those, 46 or so, and you'll notice on some slides it's 46 or 47, 48. It's all when we took the snapshot. So this was a snapshot earlier in January. And then there are 538 children with special needs with IEPs who are educated here. And so you can see them by level on the left-hand column, and then over on the right you can see the elementary ones broken out. And you can see at the moment that while we may have 72 children with in our preschool, 40 of them are children with IEPs in that preschool. And here's the special ed staffing. Look at the various categories there. There are teachers, we have 2 occupational therapists. We have 1 ABA role, which is a new role last year. We used to contract out for that service. It was very costly. Now we have someone on staff. We think the cost is better managed, but as well as a person who's here all day, every day, not just working with individual children, but working with families and supporting teachers and doing training and all of that. So that was a good move to bring that in-house. And then we have paraeducators, we have tutors and building clerical support. We have an American Sign Language person that we don't need this year because we had one child who was deaf, and he has now graduated, and so that is a service we don't need every year, but we need it sometimes. We have an in-house now, a district coordinator. That was a new role that we put in last year. We have psychologist chairs at the elementary level, and at the secondary level we have an early childhood coordinator, and it goes on and on. So those are all for the in-house youngsters. Out-of-district tuitions. So there are different kinds of programs that are out there. Private day schools, those are all over Eastern Mass, and we have 16 children who are served in those schools. And the range of those tuitions is $26,090 all the way up to $114,000. One child, 1 year. And those are day schools. If you look at the residential schools, you can imagine the costs are much higher, and they are, of course. And those residential schools, there are 11 children in those schools, 45.3 all the way up to our most costly placement, which is at $268,735. Again, one child, one year. And that particular tuition last year, I think, was $225. So that's an extraordinary increase in that one school's tuition. Then we have children who are special education students who are in institutional settings. The most common one that you might know about is the Canton Hospital School. For those children, it is a residential program, but for those children, the tuition is actually deducted from our Chapter 70 money before we get it. So the only time any money shows up in that column in our budget, and it does sometimes, is that some of those children need an aide, a full-time aide, to be there assisting them in the program. So that would be money that we pay out of our budget. And that's the reason we keep the line here, even though the tuition itself comes from Chapter 70. Other public schools, we only have two for next year. This is next year's projection. There are programs that have been in the Braintree Public Schools, programs that have been in the Hull Public Schools over the years, program in Situate, and so these are other public schools that run a program and accept children from other communities because the children in those programs are low incident disabilities. And each community might only have 2 or 3 children, and so it makes good sense for the public schools to band together. As a result, those tuitions are smaller numbers. And then we have our collaboratives. So sure, collaborative is the collaborative that we belong to. 20 of our kids are there. But there are other collaboratives that may have a specialized program. And collaboratives, again, tend to be a good bang for the buck in terms of dollars. And they also are very good programs, quality programs. So that's the tuition breakdown as we know it for next year. Last week, it was 57 students here. Today, it's 56 students. And who knows, by the time you next see the budget, it could change again. There's a lot of movement in this budget during the year and from year to year as well. So I next want to come into this category. I mentioned facilities. I mentioned we have a backlog of facilities needs. We have some new needs because of our new facilities, which are great, but they have brought with them some costs. And that's what this section is about. So this whole section is then about the facilities breakdown. And the categories are custodial services. Last year, you'll remember, we added 3 custodians, 2 at the middle school and 1 at the high school. And that is, this budget this year is bigger partly because it represents the new people we added last year, and then, of course, contractual benefits and so on. Electricity is here, heat is here, other utilities mainly, that would be phone, and then the different maintenance costs. And we have a request for a maintenance person in this budget. We eliminated back in 08, 09, 9, 10, those years when we were actually reducing people, we eliminated a maintenance man, and we've restored many of those positions over the years. Very appreciative of that. This one didn't get restored then, didn't get restored last year when we asked for it, and so it's in the budget. It's in the budget again. And as well, in that purple section there is the new position that we're asking for. I won't go through each one of these, but you can look at the various categories and see what the trend is over time and see where the costs have gone up the most. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 years here, and you can see that green bar is going up more significantly than the others. The others have been more stable. Look at all the blues and all of the reds and so on. Not quite as much growth as there has been with the green, and that has to do with the facilities and operations. You can look individually at the different categories there. Across the bottom, you have electricity, and we have heat and utilities and maintenance and custodial. Again, just a different way of looking at what's happening with those costs for the same 4 years. Oops. Energy, we have natural gas, and this chart has 2 things on it. We have the usage and we have the cost. So the red shows you the cost, and the usage in the blue. And for the most part, one would expect more usage, more cost, but of course there are things that happen, like gas can be high or gas can be low, and so those things can vary a lot. The middle school, the new middle school, uses gas, so you're going to see that budget go up. On the other hand, the oil budget we should see going down, and so here's the oil budget, again, the red being the cost of the oil that we use, and the blue being the amount of fuel that we actually use. So we're projecting down. This year was down a bit because the middle school has gas, and next year will be down a bit as well. So you can spend a lot of time on these if you choose to, but they're really just there so you get a sense of what our needs are. And John has backup for how many therms and how many gallons and how many everything. So if anyone has an interest in knowing details, then you can check with him. Electric budget is the one that, you know, we worry about a lot because it has gone up significantly, and it's gone up particularly in the new buildings, and you hear a lot about, well, new buildings are more efficient and all of that. And they are more efficient probably in terms of environmental impact, but they use more electricity, and a lot of that has to do with those big air handlers that you see on the roof, and the fact that codes for air exchange have changed, and therefore you need bigger and more powerful fans, and fans use electricity. And that's a major part of that story. The other piece of the story with electricity, of course, is that we have much more technology than we ever did, but that's not nearly as significant as the air exchange and the fans. So, the new position that we're requesting, and it is a new position, and some would say, well, you know, it's not a level services thing, and it isn't, but it is a new position, and it reflects a need, and this is a needs-based budget. So this just shows you where that person would be. That person would function under John in John's office, and would supervise then the building and grounds maintenance person, who is Paul Field, and the high school and grounds supervisor, who is Larry Babcock, who's also the head custodian at the high school, and our new last year custodial supervisor, Katie Hartman, who used to be at East School as a head custodian. And so we would have good supervision as well as expertise for this new position in procurement and engineering and all of those kinds of things that can allow us to do projects in a more organized way and to supervise the staff that we have doing those projects, and to put the systems in place that allow us to move forward with those projects. We have put on the table a suggestion that there might be some cost sharing here. This is a position we badly need, but one of the things we would plan for this person to do in the first year is to do an assessment of all of our properties, and get all of that information into a software tool called School Dude, so we'd have a sense of, you know, how many boilers are there and how old are they, and all of those kinds of things that we need to know about all of our properties. And certainly on the town side, they have properties too, so one of the thoughts that we had was for at least the first year here, while we think we need this person full-time ultimately, maybe having that person do some work on the town side, the same kind of assessment, so we have one person, same eyes, looking at all of the different needs. That might be a good suggestion. So both Irma, representing the selectmen, and the school committee, had interest in exploring that idea more. There's not been any vote taken by either body, but there is a proposal that will go to both of them about an amount of money that comes from money that has been set aside by the selectmen to do this kind of assessment, and so it doesn't involve any new budget dollars. But you'll hear more about that, certainly the selectmen side and the school committee. Ted and Betty and John and I met this morning, and we'll be forwarding to our respective groups a specific proposal to offset this cost by some. Oops, let me get that one in there. So I want to go next to the full-day kindergarten. So this is where we started, with a full-day kindergarten study, exploratory study that went to the school committee last fall. A lot of discussion, a lot of talk, but agreement that it's the time for full-day kindergarten in Hingham. The advisory committee was certainly all present at the presentation that we did, and we presented all of the arguments and all of the rationale for why it's an important thing to do. So this presentation isn't going to get into that at all. But when we cost out, or when I did the costing out of what the additional cost would be, the total that we came up with, assuming, because you always have to make assumptions to do a budget, we were assuming that we'd have 300 youngsters next year in kindergarten, and there would be 15 sections all neatly divided, and that never happens, but that's our assumption. And so these are the costs that we need. 5 new teachers. We have 3 people who are part-time teachers who would move to full-time, so those are not new FTEs, but 1.5 more FTEs. We have some pieces of specialist people because right now kindergartners don't have art, music, PE, Spanish, library, media, and computer. And is that it? Yes, I got them all. There are 6 things anyway, and that we would need to have those things. And this again is a restoration thing. That before East School opened, we had 3 schools. We had each of those things in every building. East School opened, our intent was to try to do that, add that on for that building, and we were not able to get that as a part of our override request. And so we've been chipping away at trying to get back to that kind of a status where we'd have full-time in every building. So this is the budget, and it hasn't changed. This was the original budget. This is what we think it would cost for that program. However, as it got time to actually put something on paper in terms of a funding plan for consideration as part of the overall budget, we looked to see how much we might be able to raise in tuitions. We had originally thought tuitions could be one component of the funding plan, a town contribution could be another component of the plan, some possible reductions in circuit breaker reimbursement, in Chapter 70 reimbursement over time could be a part of that plan, and there's some state grant money. Well, as it turned out, the state grant money is not something that we would know about until September, and we don't even know how much it would be. So it didn't seem like we could count on that as being part of the funding plan, but rather that we might be able to count on in subsequent years in whatever amount we would get to offset some of the costs. Similarly with the reimbursement from Chapter 70. Chapter 70 provides money to cities and towns on a per pupil basis for different kinds of categories. And so they count kids as 1.0 whole kids or half kids in terms of that funding. And so you get more money for full-time kids than you do for half-time kids. You get more money for full-time kids that are in the other half day free than you do for full-time kids for whom there's a tuition. So, but again, that's reimbursement money. So we can't use it as part of a funding plan, particularly in the first year, because we haven't yet spent the money. So when it came time to make a budget proposal, this is the budget proposal we put together. We were able to get some data from some other communities that gave us a sense of parent incomes and the range that they are and what those communities could raise in revenues. And we said, you know, of that 850, 844, 850, we think that we can get about 650 of it in tuitions. And so while it would be nice to know that over time we might get either state grants or we might get the Chapter 70 additional money, certainly in the first year they're not going to be there. So we put forth kind of a pilot for the first year. And when we say pilot, we don't mean we're piloting full-day kindergarten. We're intending to do full-day kindergarten. We're piloting the funding plan. So this is what appeared at our first budget presentation. $650 coming from tuitions and a request as part of the budget for $200 coming from the town. But things have changed. So as of last Thursday night, I think it was, we have a new proposal. And the new proposal is for a couple of reasons. We're asking for a lot, and the things that are unknowns are going to be unknowns for a while. We have to take some of the unknowns off the table. But more importantly, we have our own data now, because we did a preliminary registration, an actual survey, a SurveyMonkey survey. We got back, at this point, I think we're at 285 people have responded to the survey. And that survey included information based on a sample tuition plan. tuition plan, if we're going to apply for money from the state, and we have some money from the state that we already have received, the tuition plan has to be approved by them, as well as, of course, by the school committee. And it has to be a sliding scale, and there have to be certain categories of children who go free. But we were able to, in that survey, find out some information, first of all, about how many kids might attend. So our 300 number, I'm not so sure is so far off. But more importantly, we got some information based upon people telling us from the scale, the sample scale we gave them, how much they might expect to pay. We got some information that's Hingham information, not Cohasset or Situate or Canton, who are the other communities we used. And based upon that, we feel that in the first year, we can fund the entire program with student tuitions. So therefore, when you look at the budget page from here on, it will not have, assuming the school committee votes on this is, again, our proposal, and the school committee is going to hopefully tonight take some action, at least on allowing us to move forward with developing that scale that we have to get approved by the state. We hope that will happen tonight. And then, what will happen in the future? Well, again, the school committee hasn't taken a vote on this, and maybe it'll be a discussion tonight or maybe not, but there are many of us who think that ultimately this program should be a part of our regular budget every year, just the way second grade is and fifth grade and so on. And that we do understand that it may be that a multiple year easing into that would be the way that will go. So that's the new proposal from the school administration. But it does take that big bump of dollars off the table as we're considering the budget for this year. So how would that actually work? Well, what's going to happen is that all of those costs for the kindergarten, the people costs, will get moved into those other sections of the budget. So the 4 special education teachers, 2 of them being classroom teachers with dual certification and 2 being new special education teachers, they would move into the 2300B account. Those costs would move in there, and those FTEs. And then the 3 new teachers and the 1.5 FTEs for people who are moving from part-time to full-time, they'd move into the 2300B account, and they would appear there. And then the tuitions that we receive would be an offset to the bottom line of the budget. So these people all have to go and live somewhere, and certainly because this funding plan would be a pilot in the first year, we want to keep track of it. We have budgeted a certain amount for each category, and we want to keep track of how our hiring goes and so on, and that we stay within that overall. So we've got some bookkeeping to do with this, but the teachers would be going into different funding categories where they belong, and then the cost would be an offset. We would have to, for tuition, the state says you have to set up a separate revolving account just for this kind of tuition. So you can't mix it in with the Fields money or with the athletic fund or any of that. It has to stand out as a separate one, which of course makes the funding easier. It assumes 300 kids and 15 sections, but what if we don't have 300 kids? What if we have 200 kids? If we have 1 section less and we have 14 sections and not 15 sections, well, that's about $80,000 less in cost. So it's less revenue if you have only 14 sections, but it's also less cost, and we think that's a workable management system. So I want to give a lot of credit to Liza, who did a lot of work in playing around with these numbers and making us feel confident. So if it doesn't work out. But anyway, giving it's really the data that made us feel comfortable that we can alter our proposal for next year anyway. So capital projects, and that goes through a different process, so I won't list them all here. But we submitted a capital budget, and it was prioritized by the entire school committee, had input into this, $1,297,715. We got about $648 this year, so that's a big number. And you can see some of the things that are there that are notable items, things that either you didn't see before because in the case of the hot water boiler, it just collapsed or whatever happens to boilers. But it's not something that we anticipated for this year. You know, we have some issues with erosion control, and we need to have more playable play surface for children at East School. So you can see the things that are there that are notable in that budget. Some more things from the list. We've heard there may be some rethinking on the converting of the fire call boxes, but we've got it in our budget anyway, and we'll wait seeing what happens there. We've got a replacement program for vans. We lease our buses, we own our vans, and so obviously you've got to have some sort of replacement there. And then depot paving, you know, the depot, we have responsibility for certain tracks at the depot, but they are used to a large extent, that property, for other things as well. And so over time, things like paving, nobody sort of wants to own that, and so that gets deferred and deferred and deferred. And so we think that it's really important for safety reasons and for accessibility for all of our vehicles that need gasoline and so on to get over there, and that we've got to do that at some point, so that's in here. We've deferred some things, and for good reasons. And in this case, the reasons really, and the first reason doesn't have to do with money so much as, you know, we had a long-standing concern about our Building 12, which houses our Tracy's program, and at one point we had a plan for moving that function into Building 179. However, the town has a grand master plan for dealing with some of its space needs too, but we're waiting on some things to happen and some decisions, and so we have to defer dollars because this is an important problem that we have to solve, but we're doing that not because the dollars aren't there, but because we need to await some other things to happen. Our garage doors, you know, that's another thing that sort of no one wants to own. Everybody likes a place to store their junk. You know, the harbor master has stuff there, and not that his boats are junk, but the senior night people at the high school, they store stuff there. And so there's a lot of community use, but no one wants to stand up and say, you know what, I think we should replace the garage doors because we use some of it. And we sort of don't want to do that because we don't store our buses there anymore. So there are certain things that just get, John says they keep getting kicked down the road, and that's true. But those are things you should be aware of that are big needs that we just aren't able to solve at this point. So where do we go from here? Because February 23rd is coming pretty darn quickly. And so we've got to come to some conclusion on this budget and some conclusion on what we can do about it. We're going to go back and look at all these things, the personnel categories. We're going to hope for changes in personnel, you know, hope for some more retirements, for a full year leave of absence, for some changes in people that are on leave this year and whether or not they come back. We're awaiting some decisions that we won't have in time for the budget to be done by OSD, some of the bigger tuitions, and the Operational Services Division are either approving or not some special ed tuitions for next year. We're going to be looking at pending placements that we have and meetings that are coming up and where decisions could go in one direction or another. State funding, after the Chapter 9C cuts came out yesterday, it was a bit scary. And because you all know that because we don't have the governor's budget as we normally would have by this time, even the revenue forecasting, you know, is a little more challenging. But the 9C cuts are, of course, for this year, but what does that suggest about what is in the governor's mind in terms of the Chapter 70 for next year? So that's something that we've got to look at. We're going to go back and look at all of our offsets and our revolving accounts and the new fees, tuition structures that we have, fees for using our facilities, and seeing whether or not we can get increased offsets from revolving accounts to the operating budget. And we're going to look to see whether or not we have any change in vocational education. That's another one of those things that's a mandate, and so, you know, if a child lives in Hingham, gets accepted at vocational school, then we pay the bill. And of course, those acceptances don't happen until April and May. So I want to close by talking about something that Ray talked a bit about in his opening remarks, and it's all about language and terms. You know, during this process, we hear a lot about those three words, and they're all really pretty good words, I think. As concepts, sustainability, we all want to sustain the budget. We want to sustain our standard of living, if you will, at home. Level services is a term we've talked about a bit earlier tonight. Ray talked about it. And equity. So those are words that we hear a lot, and they're all nice words. My concern is when we ask for definitions of those things, I think we all may think of different ways to define level services, sustainability, and equity. For example, when people who are looking at budgets look at sustainability, it seems always to be about money. And when I think about sustainability and education, I think, how can we sustain the quality of education that we have in this town? And I think it's a good quality, and I think people expect good quality. So how do we sustain that? How do we sustain our ability to provide for the kids that come to our buildings every day with all kinds of problems? Every kind of problem that exists in society exists in this town. Perhaps not at the same levels as it may exist in a more urban area or a different kind of a demographic. But we have to sustain our ability to manage those things. And that isn't always able to be done in a climate where level services is a philosophical approach. So level services means to me, or at least what it's come to mean for me as we've talked about budgets over the years, is level services is what you would pay to do next year what you're doing this year. That's kind of how level services has been defined. What you would pay next year to do what you're doing now. Well, in the educational setting, so much of what we're doing isn't trying to replicate what we were doing last year. It's trying to provide what kids need for not only next year, but for their entire future. So when you think in terms of level services, unless we can agree on a definition that's kind of a little bit broader, it seems like going backwards rather than going forward. And level services would not take into account things like the additional kinds of resources we need, whether they're for things like the facilities manager, or for things like special ed needs, particular ones, or for things like kids that need behavioral interventions that aren't special education kids, for kids that come to us with a great need for social learning experiences, for social support, for medical and health support, things that don't fall under the special ed budget. So I think level services is an area where we need to be able to agree better on what it really means, and I think it really is in the context. And our context is perhaps different from the context of those. And when I say our context, I'm thinking about the educators, and certainly supported by our school committee, but I'm talking about the educators and what we see as level services and other needs. And lastly, equity. We hear a lot about equity because we're only one of many town departments. We think we're unique in many aspects, but we're only one of many. So what does equity really mean? You know, I'm the oldest of 8 children, and I had a very wise mother. And some of you in this room probably remember her, a hardworking woman, very simple person, but she raised all of us with very kind of simple statements. So in a large family, there's always the time when somebody says, she got a bigger piece of cake than I did, and that's just not fair. Or on Christmas morning, my brothers and sisters would count the presents. She got 5. No, she got 6. That's not fair because we didn't get the same amount. And my mother would always, and we would say to her, Mom, it's not fair. He did such and such. It's not fair. And she would always say, fair means that you each get according to your need. And so is there a difference between equity and equality and fairness. Those are all words that seem related, but I think they're all very, very different. And so I think that we have to think, because our departments are different, and we're not the only department that has unique needs. I mean, you have departments that have major need is around vehicles. You have other departments where the major need is around personnel. You have other departments where the major need is around things. So what does equity really mean? And I guess I would have to agree with my mother, is that each gets what he or she needs, and that to me is fair. And I just want to go back to the sustainability for a minute, because I think we tend to think sustainability in a budget way. Are we going to have enough resources to sustain the services that we need to provide here? And I think there's another side to the sustainability. One side of it is the reduce side, the be cautious about what you spend side, and we need to be cautious about what we spend. But the other thing about sustainability is that I don't think we can ever sustain municipal services at the level that they need to be unless we also think of the revenue side. So I'm hoping that over time, that as we look at all the wonderful projects we do, that there are a lot of buckets that we have to fill. We have to have a bucket that has reserves, and we do, and that's a great thing. We have to have a bucket to pay for OPEB. We have to have a bucket for capital. And I just hope that, and we have to have a bucket for special projects, whether it be tax relief in 1 year or whatever. Those buckets are all important, but you know what? I worry about the bucket that needs to be there for the operating budget. So I hope that as we look for ways to be able to be more sustainable by increasing revenues, that we don't forget the bucket that needs to be there for operating costs, not just for us, but for all the town departments. So be glad to answer questions, and certainly John and Ellen and Liz are here, and school committee members. And
Dot, I'll start off. Thank you so much. It is another wonderful, comprehensive, well thought out program. And you've given us a lot tonight to think about and a lot of numbers to digest as we move towards the end of the month. I'm also impressed with the all-day K, and thank you, Liza, for a very, very creative solution, because I think all of us that have watched this across the state, it wasn't if, it was when. But how do you implement it without huge amounts of money and hurting other pieces of the budget, whether it's yours or someone else's? So I think this is very, very creative. The other piece, I'm very fully supportive of facilities management. It's something that I've been pushing since I was on Capitol. I think this is also a real breakthrough where we can share resources. Many other towns are already doing this. I think this would be a wonderful way to start it off. We definitely have some looking to do at numbers, as you do, but I think this is excellent, as always. You do a wonderful job. So I'll open it to the polls, and then we'll turn it over to advisory.
You came from the school committee.
Yes, I did cover the school committee, and it's good to see.
Can we turn the lights back on?
Yeah, we should say, remember your roots, Paul.
I never forget
Was that the Irish roots you're talking about? Okay.
Don, I never forget where I came from.
That's good to know.
That's a fact.
That's good to know.
So I want to thank you for your
He's
presentation.
talking Celtic, by the way. So.
Talking on many levels. I want to thank you for your presentation. I do miss spending time with my colleagues on the school committee, and I know you all do a very thorough job in looking at the budget, so it's a pleasure to have you and sit with you. But, you know, Don, I kind of want to just say, again, the town has no better advocate than you for the kids, for the education and the services that provided. We're very lucky, and I mean that sincerely. You know. And probably to no surprise to my colleagues on the school committee, I completely agree with you on the needs-based budget approach that we have attempted, as Ray said, over the last couple of years to foster in the school committee. And I think the school department is different in some ways than other departments in terms of what the needs are and what the contractual obligations are and the state obligations are. So, you know, to the extent that I can, I'm only one person, but to the extent that my voice and my vote counts at all, I would be supporting that kind of approach. And I'm very enthusiastic and thank Liza and everybody in the school committee for delving into a full-day kindergarten. From what I understand, it's something whose time has come, whose day has come, and we look forward to working with you to try to make it happen.
You know, I'd like to mention one other thing. Just yesterday, there was a new report released by the Rennie Center. And it's the Center for Educational Policy and Research. I'm sorry. A new report came out yesterday from the Rennie Center, and the Rennie Center is all about educational research and policy setting. And they come out with periodic reports where they talk about things that need to happen. And interestingly, the 3 things that are in the action plan for the coming year are early childhood education. Now, they're talking preschool, giving more children access to preschool. So I think that the assumption is that the ship has already sailed on kindergarten because 88% of the kids in our state are in full-day programs. So that's focus number 1. Focus number 2 was around providing adequate support for kids who come to school with needs that are not academic needs, but needs that are needs for help, for support, for family support, for interventions, and the things that need to happen in schools, not just to provide academics, but to provide the support that allows all kids to really access the education that we provide for them. The third thing isn't so much related to our budget. Those 2 were. The third thing is about giving more kids access to a college experience, and that's the action plan for the coming year. So there are 2 of those 3 things that really are just what we're talking about, demographics of our student population and early childhood. And by the way, I'm putting those 2, there's a data analysis that shows you where we stand on each of those 3 categories, and then there's a report, very readable, not too long, and I'm going to put both of them on the website tomorrow under the superintendent section of our website.
Thank you. I too come from a large family. I'm the oldest of 7, and I had the pleasure of going through the Hingham Public Schools, as did my wife with her 6 brothers and sisters, and all of my 5 children went through, so I don't need to be sold on the value of a good education. What I need to be sold in on is how to pay for all this. And, you know, my service to the town in the last couple of decades has been in the planning department, and I look at the growth, and I'm trying to figure out how this is all going to be paid for. I'd ask you, Mr. Alexiadis, how does this figure into the forecast projections that we've heard in the past? Can you speak to that?
I can give you just the rough numbers at this point in time. I'm looking at this data, new too, but right now I'm going to say that we're about $2.1 million in a deficit for this budget total for the town and the school department if we roll these numbers in. So that's going to be a big challenge for us to bridge that gap. That's not a small number for us to get to.
And we were aware of that. We were very
And that's the conversation that's going to be had.
What I appreciate is that you put the needs out there versus trying to back into a number first. So now we know what needs to be done. I have a question on full-day kindergarten. What has been the reception to full-day from the private providers we have in the town?
Well, only a few of our private providers provide a kindergarten program. And honestly, you know, we're going to be competition for them. On the other hand, there are always families that will choose private kindergarten no matter what. And in fact, one of the things I think we found out when we did our little preliminary survey, and we asked the question, will your children go to the Hingham Public Schools next year? And then we asked later, would they go to the full-day program? But there are a number of people who say, no, my child's going to go to St. Paul's because the children are going to go there for the rest of their career. They're going to go to Derby or Hingham Nursery. So while they haven't said you're our competition, we know that we are, but I think they also know that many of the private schools, it's a tradition of the family attending, and so not all kids will come just because we have a program. Even though our program, at the fee that we're recommending it be, the maximum fee for the sliding scale, is less than significantly less than what they are paying.
Can I just
Privately.
add to that thought? Also, we found in looking at surveying at first graders, not everybody goes to private full day K. About 40 to 45% actually don't. So it's not as if we are totally taking away a market from an existing group. There are a number of kids that just don't go, and probably because of the price. Well, it could be the price. They can't afford that a higher tuition. So.
But you've got a mechanism built into this that if a family is interested in that and can't afford it, it will be made available?
It will be a sliding scale, when I say by law, if we want to be eligible for future state grants and we want to be able to spend the money that we just got on a state grant for buying things of the program, money that has to be spent by June, that we have to commit to a certain percentage of kids being free. And they have a scale that they suggest, one that we would likely, I think, modify a bit, but one that we gave out in the sample. And so that there is a lot of leeway for free under that guideline, or reduced, because it's a sliding scale. And the $3,500 fee, which is the fee that was in the sample, is less than what kids pay for Kids in Action now. It's a little bit more than the children pay for the integrated kindergarten and preschool experiences, and kind of in the middle of those, and it's very close to the average that full-day kindergartens all over the state pay. So,
will this cannibalize Kids in Action?
No. It will change it significantly, but Kids in Action really has three components. They have a small preschool program. Maybe that could grow if we have space. They have the before and after school component of the program, which is for all grades, and then they have the kindergarten wraparound, which was the biggest component of the program. So that no longer will be necessary. That will go away, but so will costs that are associated with it, the teachers and the aides and so on, and given the number of new positions we'll have as part of this program, because having an aide in every classroom, for example, is one component of it. We think that we can accommodate most of those folks that way. So it will change it, because it will take away the wraparound piece, but still a great need for before and after school and the preschool piece as well.
Why don't I turn it over to Mary and the advisory committee and then come back to us?
Is there anyone in the advisory committee who has any additional questions about the presentation tonight?
Let me just say one thing. Tom Piles from the advisory committee, and I happen to be chairing a subcommittee that is working with the school administration and the school committee. And our task is to recognizing that there is a very large cost here that creates a budget deficit that's larger than the ones in the past. Our task over the next few weeks is to work with the school administration and the school committee to try to prioritize and define what may be the tough choices of what issues and what items might be relevant to their needs and may not be something that they can take on this year but sometime in the future.
And Dot, I just a comment and a question. Thank you for looking at the revolving funds again. And in particular, as I'm looking at your budget request and you're asking for a lot of support with maintenance and custodial, I'd appreciate you're particularly looking at your building department revolving fund to see if some of those dollars that you're collecting from renting the facilities that's driving the additional cost of taking care of those facilities is used to offset the cost. I'm thinking that a little greater application would allow you to get the resources that you need while still allowing us to work under the budget constraint.
I think over time, that is going to be a bigger source. We have a new fee structure that just started this year, so we don't yet have a whole year of history with it, but we absolutely will look
Thank
at
you.
that. And
I
everything
guess
else.
the other thing is, as you're looking at this, and it's, I don't necessarily have a point of view, but it's a little bit of a conundrum. You know, earlier tonight, we were talking, the selectmen were talking about the snow and ice budget, which this year, really, really high. And every year we budget to sort of a 10-year or a 5-year average. And so we know that in some years it's going to be higher, it's going to be lower. And Ted mentioned, you know, with our snow and ice budget, we don't want to budget so much that we actually are planning to spend dollars that we don't use and that could be used somewhere else. As I look at the out-of-district placements, which are a couple $1 million, and a projection of 10 new placements, and a pattern over the last 2 years where the school department has returned close to $2 million in unused out-of-district tuition dollars that were budgeted, it's sort of saying to me, particularly in light of the budget that we're facing right now, is there an opportunity to think about how to fund, how to budget, you know, somewhere in that equation? Because, you know, I think what would be a shame is we obviously need to make sure that we're budgeting so that we take care of all our students. But I think it would be a shame if at the end of this year we made tough choices as a town and found that we were returning some significant dollars back to the town at the end of the year and saying, gosh, I wish we had done something different with that. And so I don't necessarily have a solution to that, but I hope that's going to be part of our conversation over the next few weeks as we, you know, as we work to come to a final budget recommendation. And I would just close by thanking you and John and the school committee, not just for the presentation, but for all the time you've invested in developing this budget, in working with the education subcommittee, and in meeting with us a couple of Saturdays ago. So thank you.
Actually, we met today with Linda.
I didn't have a chance to talk with Mary.
And Tom. And we talked exactly about that because we budget by child,
Right.
and we look at it. I mean, Liz pores over that budget, and there could be a change even coming up in the next few days. Every time there's a team meeting, there can be a change. The problem we have of just saying, well, let's just take a risk. You know, we've got these kids that we're dealing with. Maybe we're in mediation. Maybe they're in a 45-day kind of a diagnostic placement, and it could go. Let's just take a risk. And the problem we have in doing that is the numbers are so big.
Absolutely.
If you take a risk on buying something or not, or take a risk on a price of something, and you're wrong, and it's $20,000 and a $46 million budget, you know, that's one thing. But if you take a risk and you're wrong, and it's a $125,000 placement, so we do budget. 4 kids. Every one of those 57 has, you know, a number and a name and a school next to it. So certainly some things may change, and they may change for the better. But and at this point, quite honestly, we're looking at a deficit. Not a deficit. We're looking at giving money back this year, possibly in special ed. I won't talk about the rest of the budget, but in special ed, and it is because we budgeted a number of kids, and things have happened. We've had kids that have come back to the district. Well, how wonderful is that? But it creates a pool of money. But certainly I get the idea, because I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of having to cut things that we need, because it's not as if we get it back and can use it for other things. You know, we all know it comes back and it goes there in that bucket, and that's fine. But so it's not to our advantage to budget that way either.
And we certainly, you know, with the reserve fund of $550,000, we appreciate the fact that you're such careful budgeters, and you've got a long history of not coming to us for reserve fund transfers. And, you know, your stewardship of the dollars is something that we really value. I'm just wondering if maybe it's worth a conversation in the next couple weeks, because maybe if a couple of us talk about it, there's a different way to think about it that would be beneficial to the town, that would help us manage the risk. I just feel like maybe having a conversation, given the size of the deficit, could be helpful. Thank you, Irma.
Yeah, just Mary, on that point, I know some may suggest, some have actually already suggested that, we're seeking to have this special education reserve fund approved at town meeting, but that would deal with unanticipated placements. These are folks that are right. These are folks that are budgeted, that are intended. We know what schools are going to be in. We know what those dollars are, so that wouldn't even fit into that category. So it really is, and I think we've looked at a lot of other towns and other districts that do roll the dice and do take risks, not knowing, and then they get burned. And we found ourselves a few years ago with a situation where we had those move-ins, $533,000, and we were fortunate enough to be able to find a way to deal with it. And then the next year, those kids were gone. So it really is a challenge for us.
Let me ask you, John, a question that we asked you every year that I was on advisory. As part of closing the gap here, is any thought to charging for buses? Because most towns, many towns, pick the right word, do have a bus fee.
We have not discussed that recently. I would give my same personal answer I always have, and that is, it's kind of like I feel about kindergarten. It's a public school, and kids need to get there. The school committee, of course, could bring that up again at any point, but there are a lot of issues with that, other than the whole issue of equity, if you will, equity of access in terms of getting to school. But I think there are a lot of other practical considerations about how it actually works. And so the last time we did a study, it seemed like at that time maybe it would raise $70,000, maybe now it would raise $100,000, but it isn't something that we have talked about recently. Last time we talked about it, I think, was when we did the whole fee structure, revised the fee structure.
I think it was too, because I still have a copy of that, which is what kind of brought it to mind
Well, there's
when
a
I was
lot of
looking at
kids
it.
that were required to provide transportation for.
Yes. Yeah.
So it would be a limited target.
Anything else from here? Anything from the audience? Okay. Mary,
Thank
do
you
you?
very much.
Thank you so much, Dot, and you too, Ray, and the whole school committee.
School committee's going to remain in session. We're going to adjourn to our conference room and
Okay.
continue.
I will take the motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
All in favor? I know, I am. And we will go into executive session. So I recommend the board enter executive session to discuss strategy with respect to real estate negotiations, because discussion in open session may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the town. The board will not resume open session this evening. So a roll call vote.
Aye.
Aye. Done.